What's up, everyone? I'm Mo from Time Off Audio. Today, I'm very excited to present to you my first plugin, Dime TT. The TT stands for transient and tonal, because what Dime TT does is it splits the transient and tonal components from an incoming audio signal and lets you process them independently with any VST3 or audio unit plugin. It's basically a transient designer on steroids, with the idea of breaking free from the limitations I've been seeing in other transient designer plugins. There's also the idea that I like to call the meta plugin, which helps us break free from another limitation of how plugins interact with each other. Traditionally, in most DAWs, the only way two plugins interact with each other is by having the output of one be the input of the next, or by having the output of one be used as a sidechain input for another plugin. With a meta plugin like Dime TT, we don't have that limitation anymore, since it's directly hosting all your other plugins and combining them in a way that's very difficult to replicate in most DAWs. A meta plugin would also be a great fit for mid-side processing and multiband processing, which are the basis of the next two plugins that I will be releasing. So make sure to subscribe to this channel and to the newsletter on the website to stay in the loop. But for now, it's time to jump into Dime TT and take a look. So here we are in Ableton Live. The first time you're going to open Dime TT, you will be prompted to scan the plugins in your system. Now, this is an important step for Dime to actually be able to recognize all the plugins you have installed. Since here I'm on Mac OS, I have the option to scan both VST3 and audio unit plugins. So I'm just going to go ahead and scan the VST3 plugins to start. Once that is done, you'll be able to see all the plugins that Dime TT was able to scan right here in the settings under the plugins tab. Now for a quick overview of the UI. Here in the header, you have the transient detection controls, which we'll get into through a couple examples I will be taking you through in a bit. You have the light and dark mode because it's 2024. You have the bypass button, which is a global bypass of the entire plugin, standard stuff. Then you have the settings, which you can see all the scanned plugins like we saw. And then you have the general settings of the plugin where you'll be able to control settings pertaining to the waveform display that we will see in a second, access your license information, and generic info about the plugin. If there are any software updates pending, like a new version of the plugin that was just released, this is also where you will be able to see that. Back to the main view. The main UI of Dime TT is broken down into the two components, transient and tonal. The boxes here to the left are where we're going to actually be loading our plugins. So these are plugin slots, which you have 4 of on each component. The headphone toggle button is to solo each section to be able to addition both the transient detection and the effect that we have loaded in the chain. On the right-hand side, we have our balance control. You're going to be using this a lot because what this does is it will bias the blend of the transient and the tonal components once they're mixed back together. So if you want a more punchy, more emphasis on the attacks, on the clickiness of the kick or the snare, you're going to go to bias towards the transients. And on the other hand, if you want more emphasis, if you want to de-emphasize the transients, you're going to bias towards the tonal. On the left-hand side here, you have what I call the quick controls. We're going to see this in action in just a bit, but this is a very nice way to be able to control the parameters of one of the hosted plugins without actually having the UI of that plugin open. So we're going to be able to map sliders directly within the interface of Dime to any parameter of any plugin that we have hosted and control it directly from within here. And finally, in the bottom right here, we have the output level meter, as well as some global controls, such as the input gain, the output gain, and the mix, to be able to blend in the global effect that Dime is having on our signal. Now on to our first example. Transient designers are often used on percussive elements or drum tracks. I wanted to showcase it in a more melodic fashion by using it on a synthesizer. I have Dime here loaded, following a very simple wavetable synth with a single squarish sounding waveform, if we're going to listen to it. But what I've done in Dime is to try to create essentially an extra layer, an extra dimension, by taking the transient and the tonal and processing them completely differently with different plugins. So let's take a quick look here at what we've done with the transient. We're going to solo it first, and we're going to play with it. So a very out there effect, obviously, with very high feedback on this delay, passing it through a very simple low pass, giving it some more space here with Valhalla, Vintage Verb, and finally adding some of that digital distortion and degradation here through the RC20. On the other side, with the tonal, what we have is this pumping, pulsating lead sound. First, putting it through Tal Chorus LX, love this effect. Again through Replica, but with very different settings, so as to create more movement and not have the transient and the tonal follow each other. And finally, I'm taking off a bit of that top end here. I have loaded in some quick controls here to be able to play around with some parameters that really interest me in the hosted plugins without having to open and close the UI of each one every time. Also, let's go ahead and play around with the balance a bit to see if we can get a more interesting sound. So we can really create a pluck out of this and have the pulsating tonal be playing in the back. You can go ahead and, since this is an out there kind of effect, bring down the mix to the halfway point. Actually, I like it kind of exaggerated in this case, so I'm going to leave it at 100%. Bring everything to the max. See how with the quick control, that was kind of cool. So yeah, with the quick control slider here, I'm able to control the feedback of one of the replica instance on the transient. Same idea here with the reverb mix. I can drying it out completely versus, and so on and so forth. Again, let's audition the dry signal with a Dime TT processed signal. Versus Now onto our second use case of Dime TT. In the first example, we saw Dime in action in a sound design use case, so to speak. Here I have loaded it on a drum track, putting it in a more of a mixing situation. Let's listen to this drum track without Dime TT. So as you can hear, we have a snare, a kick, some percussive elements, very typical of a drum track. Now I want to show you what I've done here by gradually bringing in the mix. So what have we done here? First, let's listen to the transient detection. So how have I dialed in the transient detection here without any effect on it? So what I went for in this example is essentially try to dynamically, without any automation or manual chopping, separate the drum and snare from the other percussive elements. So we still have a bit of the tail of the kick there, the sub component of the kick, but other than that, we mostly have the percussive elements and the hi-hats. So what I've done here on the transient is give it a very light, roomy sort of reverb, put it through some saturation. On the other side, with the tonal, put it through quite a bit of modulation with a phaser and a chorus. And I use the Pro Q3 here to enhance the stereo image a bit more, to widen the tonal here. So all together, this gives you a punchier, wider sort of drum sound. And one last thing here, because of that sub that was bleeding into the tonal from the kick, I've dialed back on the mix of the tonal effects chain here towards 50% and added in a high pass filter at the very beginning of the effects chain to avoid having that rumbly low end go through the phaser and the chorus. So putting it all together, let's listen to a before and after. And that's Dime TT. If you're interested, you could check it out at the link in the description below. Again, I'm Mo from Time Off Audio. Thank you for watching.